Maria Alvarez was 32 years old when her life began to quietly touch dozens of children in her small community. A single mother of one young son, she split her time between part-time shifts at a local cafe and evenings in the neighborhood community hall, where she volunteered as a dance teacher. To those who met her only briefly, she seemed ordinary, reserved, practical, and soft-spoken. But to the parents of orphans who attended her classes, she was a lifeline. They remembered her as patient, gentle, and endlessly giving. Many of the children had nothing, yet Maria created a sense of pride for them through the simplest of gestures. When shoes tore apart, she stitched them. When uniforms frayed, she found fabric scraps and patched them. When the floor grew dusty after hours of use, she cleaned it herself before leaving. In the words of one caregiver, she wasn't just teaching dance. She was teaching those kids that they mattered. The classes were not glamorous, and the space was modest. A long, echoing hall with aging wooden floors, mirrors faded by time, and fluorescent lights that hummed above. Yet for the orphans, it was a sanctuary. They arrived expecting little but left with the joy of movement and a sense of belonging. Despite her own hardships, Maria never asked for payment. She lived frugally, often skipping meals to stretch her limited budget. Friends noted her resilience. She always said her struggles were worth it if the kids could smile, recalled a neighbor. These sacrifices painted a picture of devotion, but they also revealed how vulnerable she was. Alone, financially strained, and pouring all her free hours into the studio, Maria had little left for herself. On the evening of the 12th of March, after a weekend rehearsal that stretched late, Maria walked her final students to the door of the hall. She waved goodbye, reminded them of their next class, and turned back inside to tidy up. Hours later, when she failed to arrive home, concern began to rise. Her teenage son, accustomed to her predictable schedule, grew worried when she missed their evening call. By dawn, he contacted a family friend, who in turn notified authorities. When police entered the community hall, they found her car still parked outside. Inside, her bag rested on a chair near the front mirrors. Nothing appeared stolen. Her jacket remained neatly folded, and her wallet, keys, and phone were untouched. The strangeness of her disappearance weighed heavily, because nothing suggested she had intended to leave. She had vanished without trace between the moment she closed the door behind her students and the time investigators arrived. Then, officers noticed a single item resting against the far wall, a scuffed dance shoe. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but its placement raised questions. Maria was known to collect used shoes for her students, yet those shoes were typically stored in a crate near the entrance. This one stood alone. Its leather was worn, the sole partially split, and faint streaks of dust marked the sides, as though it had been dragged. The immediate question became, was this Maria's shoe or someone else's? Her family could not confirm. Though she owned several pairs, most were second-hand and mismatched, making it difficult to identify. The orphans did not recognize it either, claiming they had never seen her wear that particular pair. Detectives bagged the shoe for evidence. The discovery unsettled the community. To those who adored Maria, the shoe was more than an object. It was a symbol of absence. Parents who had trusted her with their children felt a wave of fear. If someone so caring could vanish within the walls of the very place she made safe, what did that mean for the rest of them? Interviews with the children revealed little. Most had left before darkness fell. Only 2 remembered glancing back and noticing that Maria stayed behind alone, gathering costumes. One recalled the faint sound of music still playing as they walked away. Another mentioned a shadow near the entrance but assumed it belonged to a passing stranger. Investigators combed the area. Surveillance cameras outside the hall were either broken or pointed in the wrong direction. Nearby businesses closed early that night, leaving few potential witnesses. Patrols around the neighborhood produced no immediate leads. With no signs of forced entry or struggle, theories began to diverge. Had Maria stepped outside to meet someone? Had she willingly left and been prevented from returning? Her friends pushed back against those ideas. They insisted she would never abandon her son, nor leave without explanation. The small routines of her life underscored this point. Every evening she called her boy to check on his homework. Every weekend she visited her elderly mother. Her life revolved around responsibility. The sudden silence was uncharacteristic and alarming. Detectives returned to the shoe. Its scuff marks suggested recent wear, but forensic tests showed no definitive DNA traces at first pass. Fibers clung to the inner lining, too generic to trace. Still, it carried the weight of possibility. Could it have been planted? Could someone have left it behind intentionally to send a message? The absence of her diary, the one she was known to carry everywhere, only deepened suspicions. In that diary, she recorded class plans, schedules, and private thoughts. Without it, her routines were incomplete. The hall itself became a character in the investigation. Officers described its silence as unsettling. Chairs sat stacked against walls, costumes hung loosely on racks, and faint footprints marked the dusty floor. Nothing screamed violence, yet everything whispered disruption. To some, the quiet was almost louder than a struggle. Family members gathered at the site daily, holding vigils and clinging to hope. Candles lined the steps, notes and flowers piled against the locked doors. One message read, "You gave our children hope. Come home." Community grief grew into frustration as days passed without answers. Detectives widened their search. They canvassed pawn shops for her belongings, hospitals for unidentified patients, and transport hubs for sightings. None produced results. Her phone, found in her bag, yielded limited information. The last messages were reminders to students about rehearsal times. No evidence of threats or distress appeared in her digital trail. Speculation among locals intensified. Some wondered if she had an admirer who followed her. Others suggested financial desperation might have drawn her into danger. But investigators held back, insisting facts would guide them. They emphasized one detail. Maria did not vanish from her apartment or while traveling. She disappeared from her sanctuary, the place she poured her life into. That fact carried weight. The single scuffed shoe became the anchor of their case. Its unanswered questions forced detectives to reconsider possibilities. If it belonged to her, why was it left behind when all her other belongings remained neatly packed? If it did not belong to her, then whose was it? And why was it there? The ambiguity kept the case from moving forward. The unanswered riddle of the shoe marked the point where the investigation shifted from confusion to suspicion. It was not merely a forgotten object. It was evidence that someone else had been present. Whether that person intended harm or had already inflicted it was unknown. But what was clear was this. Maria Alvarez, the woman who gave everything to children who had nothing, had disappeared under circumstances that defied reason. Detectives ended their initial report with a haunting line. Her dedication to others may have placed her at risk. We must ask if her kindness became the very path to her disappearance. That question set the stage for everything that followed. Detectives working Maria Alvarez's disappearance faced a puzzling detail that shifted the direction of their inquiry. Among her belongings, investigators found printed copies of emails exchanged with a man claiming to be a world-famous music icon. The correspondence suggested a surprising relationship. Just weeks before Maria vanished, she had been contacted with an offer to fund her dream performance. This was no small gesture. The proposal described a full-scale production that would allow her orphan students to perform on a professional stage. The wording spoke of rehearsal support, costume budgets, and even the promise of recording equipment. For a struggling mom who had taught in a modest community hall, the idea was transformative. Maria had shared this news with close friends. According to several, she expressed joy unlike anything they had seen in years. One recalled her saying, "This is finally my break. The kids will be seen. People will know what they can do." Her tone, they remembered, carried both gratitude and disbelief. This was the opportunity she had hoped for, an acknowledgement of her years of sacrifice. The name attached to the emails was unmistakable. It belonged to an artist known worldwide, a reclusive figure with immense wealth and a reputation for occasional philanthropic gestures. To Maria, the offer appeared genuine. The messages referenced details about music, performance, and opportunity that mirrored his public persona. Friends who glanced at the printouts were convinced by the signature, which included recognizable, stylized initials. At first glance, nothing appeared suspicious. Investigators, however, questioned the logic. Why would such a renowned celebrity notice a single mom teaching dance in an obscure town? How had Maria come to his attention at all? Detectives pointed out that she had no website, no professional agent, and no visible media presence. Her classes were free, and her students came from marginalized backgrounds. She operated in a hall with flickering lights and secondhand mirrors. Nothing about her profile explained how a music icon would discover her. The timeline added weight to their concerns. The first email appeared in late February, less than 3 weeks before her disappearance. The tone of the message was flattering but vague. It praised her community work and expressed a desire to support real art with real meaning. Subsequent exchanges grew more specific, outlining a plan for a performance scheduled to debut in late summer. The sender spoke of excitement, opportunity, and the joy of lifting children from hardship. To Maria, these words matched her mission. She responded with openness, providing details about her students, rehearsal space, and ambitions. Detectives traced the digital footprint of the emails. Their preliminary findings raised doubts. While some communications originated from a domain similar to that of the Music Icons management team, others were sent from a free, unverified account. This inconsistency immediately concerned investigators. Was Maria corresponding with two sources, one authentic and one false, or had she been communicating solely with an impersonator? Friends described how her optimism grew. She had spoken about stage costumes, potential venues, and even mentioned the possibility of meeting the celebrity in person. One parent recalled her rehearsing extra hours, insisting that the children must be ready for something bigger than this hall. To those around her, the shift in energy was undeniable. She seemed driven by anticipation, as though her long years of struggle had finally produced recognition. Police began to question the authenticity of the opportunity. Detectives requested confirmation from the celebrity's management team. Initial responses were cautious, neither confirming nor denying involvement. The team explained that the artist often received requests and inquiries, and while philanthropy was part of his past, unsolicited offers of this nature were rare. They agreed to cooperate with investigators, but suggested patience as they reviewed the claims. The possibility that Maria had been deceived became a pressing angle. Fraudulent impersonation of celebrities was not uncommon, particularly in communities where individuals yearned for recognition. Scammers often crafted convincing stories, leveraging names of famous figures to gain trust. To detectives, the mixture of authentic-looking emails and free account correspondence suggested deliberate manipulation. Someone may have carefully built credibility before escalating the promise of life-changing support. Maria's friends emphasized her trusting nature. They insisted she believed in good intentions. She thought kindness still existed in powerful places, one explained. That belief made her an ideal target. She had little reason to suspect deception, and the thought of her orphans performing on a grand stage overwhelmed practical caution. The line between genuine hope and manipulation blurred in her eyes. When detectives compared timestamps, another detail stood out. The last message she opened came from the unverified account. It carried instructions for a meeting to discuss performance logistics. The wording was persuasive, but included minor inconsistencies. References to dates conflicted with earlier messages. A location mentioned was not a known venue, but rather a generic meeting hall listed online as rentable space. The tone was slightly different, less polished, almost rushed. Investigators now faced a critical question. Was Maria lured into a trap under the promise of opportunity? If so, who orchestrated it, and for what purpose? The mystery deepened because the shoe found in the community hall and the missing diary suggested deliberate intrusion. The emails provided motive someone could exploit her desperation for recognition. The overlap of digital manipulation and physical disappearance created a chilling link. Detectives revisited her timeline. Friends recalled her growing excitement during the final days. She spoke of organizing transportation, preparing costumes, and saving every penny to contribute to the performance. She even mentioned telling her son that their lives were about to change. The optimism she carried was not quiet. It was broadcast to those around her. This visibility may have increased her vulnerability. Law enforcement carefully preserved the emails, treating them as central evidence. Specialists analyzed metadata, searching for server trails, IP addresses, and potential aliases. Early results confirmed that the suspicious account was routed through multiple anonymous networks, complicating identification. The sophistication suggested intent. It was not a random message, but a carefully executed deception designed to appear legitimate. The case file began to frame the correspondence as the turning point. Maria's trust in the messages, her willingness to believe in a global celebrity's attention, and her preparation for a promised performance aligned closely with the timeline of her disappearance. While no direct link yet proved the messages caused her fate, the probability weighed heavily. Detectives summarized their position. Maria believed in a dream funded by a star, but investigators doubted the dream was real. Their focus shifted from asking why a celebrity would notice her to asking who had pretended to be one, and whether that deception led directly to her vanishing. The unanswered question lingered. If it was not the celebrity, then who stood behind the keyboard, watching Maria believe? Police retraced Maria Alvarez's final steps by returning to the community dance studio, where she had last been seen. The building was locked when officers arrived, and her car remained parked outside in its usual spot. With a warrant secured, detectives entered to examine every detail of the space. The first observation was unsettling. The security cameras that normally recorded activity inside the hall had been switched off on the night of her disappearance. Maintenance logs later showed no scheduled service, no reported malfunction, and no reason for the outage. Investigators noted this as the first sign of deliberate interference. Inside the hall, the space looked almost as Maria had left it. Folding chairs stood stacked neatly against one wall, a small stereo rested on a table, and scattered costumes hung on portable racks. The faint smell of cleaning supplies lingered, suggesting she had started her usual post-class routine, but the room was not untouched. Detectives found long, shallow scratches, etched into the large wall mirrors, running horizontally in uneven patterns. The marks resembled scrapes from something heavy being pushed or dragged. Their placement suggested effort had been made to move equipment or obscure reflections. To investigators, this detail indicated more than coincidence. Someone had altered the studio after the students left. Maria's students provided additional context. During interviews, several children recalled seeing a figure outside as class ended. They described a tall man in a black coat standing near the entrance. His posture was distant, and none of them remembered him speaking. At the time, they assumed he was a passerby, or perhaps a parent waiting. Only later did the description gain significance. Detectives treated it as a potential sighting of the last person connected to Maria's presence that evening. The discovery of Maria's dance bag offered more questions than answers. The bag was found tucked behind the stereo system, zipped but partially unfastened. Inside were rehearsal notes, spare dance shoes, and a water bottle. What was conspicuously absent was the diary she carried every day. That diary was central to her teaching and her personal life. Students had seen her use it to track lesson plans, mark attendance, and record personal reflections. Friends described it as inseparable from her routine. She carried it to rehearsals, to errands, and even to her cafe shifts. For it to be missing was out of character. Detectives quickly concluded that the diary's absence could not be dismissed as oversight. If Maria had chosen to leave the hall for a moment, she would have taken it. If she had been interrupted, its disappearance suggested purposeful removal. The missing diary soon became the biggest lead in the investigation. Officers theorized that it might contain the truth about the mysterious music deal she had been pursuing, along with details of her planned meeting. The forensic team examined the scratches on the mirrors more closely. Their report indicated pressure consistent with metal edges scraping against glass. The angle and length of the marks implied that a large object, possibly equipment or staging material, had been moved across the floor and into contact with the reflective surface. Yet no such object remained in the room. This raised the possibility that someone had transported something heavy in or out of the hall during the time frame of her disappearance. Combined with the camera outage, the scene suggested deliberate concealment. The tall man in the black coat remained a troubling figure in the narrative. Detectives canvassed nearby businesses and pedestrians, asking if anyone had seen him in the area. Descriptions were vague, but the consistency of the children's accounts could not be ignored. They emphasized his height, his dark attire, and his stillness. He had not blended in, but rather stood apart, observing silently. Despite their youth, the children remembered feeling uneasy, though they dismissed it at the time. Attention returned again and again to the missing diary. Without it, detectives lacked a roadmap to Maria's final days. The emails with the music icon's name raised suspicions, but only the diary could confirm her true understanding of the arrangement. If she had documented meeting plans, times, or private concerns, the absence of that record was critical. To investigators, its removal signaled intentional effort to erase evidence. The studio's atmosphere unsettled officers who spent hours combing through its details. They described the silence of the hall, the dim lighting, and the lingering signs of her presence. The space felt interrupted, not abandoned. Shoes lined the corner crate, music sheets lay folded on a table, and half-used cleaning rags sat near the sink. Everything suggested she had been midway through her nightly routine when something disrupted her. The traces of normalcy contrasted sharply with the glaring anomalies of the scratches, the missing diary, and the silent witness in the coat. Detectives began reconstructing the timeline of the night. Students departed around 8:30. Maria remained to tidy up, a habit confirmed by every child and parent. Between then and the following morning, when police entered, she disappeared. No surveillance footage documented the gap. No neighbors reported noise. Only subtle physical clues marked the change from ordinary evening to unresolved mystery. The absence of forced entry suggested she may have opened the door willingly. The description of the tall man supported the idea of someone waiting for her specifically. If Maria believed she was meeting an ally connected to her promised performance, she may have stepped outside with trust. The scratches on the mirrors could represent an attempt to move equipment under the guise of preparing for her opportunity. If so, The diary might have documented the connection, making its absence all the more telling. Detectives pressed family members for insight into her diary. They described it as a blend of planner and confidant. She wrote notes about lesson structures, student progress, and financial worries. More importantly, she recorded her hopes and anxieties. Friends insisted she would have written about the music offer in detail. If she doubted or celebrated the deal, the diary would reflect it. Its disappearance stripped investigators of her private voice. As days passed, the empty studio became symbolic of the case itself, a familiar place now filled with silence and unanswered questions. Parents who once trusted it as safe grew fearful. Students hesitated to return. The hall stood locked, its scratched mirrors reflecting only absence. For detectives, the scene remained active, every detail scrutinized for overlooked significance. The missing diary grew heavier in importance with each passing hour. It represented both a personal artifact and a potential piece of evidence connecting Maria's disappearance to the fraudulent promise of opportunity. Without it, the investigation lacked direction. With it, answers might surface. The question was whether the diary had been taken to conceal the truth, or if Maria had carried it into an encounter that ended in her vanishing. Investigators summarized the studio search in their report. The key findings included the offline cameras, the unexplained scratches on mirrors, the sighting of the tall man in the black coat, the recovered dance bag, missing its diary, and the overall absence of forced entry. Each detail alone raised questions. Together, they suggested intentional manipulation of the scene. The chapter of the case, defined by the empty studio, marked a transition. Detectives now pursued the diary as their central lead. Its recovery, they believed, would unlock the truth behind Maria's last moments in the hall and her connection to the elusive offer. Until then, the hall stood as a hollow witness, holding silence where music and movement once lived. The final question lingered in every investigator's mind. Did the missing diary contain the key to Maria's disappearance, or had it been taken precisely because it revealed too much? Detectives turned their attention to the orphans Maria Alvarez had spent her last years teaching. The children, accustomed to her reliability and warmth, became unexpected witnesses in the investigation. Officers conducted careful interviews, using trained specialists to avoid intimidation. Slowly, fragments of Maria's final days emerged from the voices of those who had known her in ways only children could. One of the first revelations came from a girl no older than 10. She recalled standing near the hallway before class when Maria stepped aside to take a phone call. The child remembered the raised tone of her voice, unusual for a woman who spoke gently even during rehearsals. According to her recollection, Maria repeated the words, money, and promises. The conversation sounded tense, as if she was confronting someone who had let her down. The girl described Maria pacing, pressing the phone tightly against her ear, and ending the call abruptly before returning to class with a forced smile. Other children corroborated hearing fragments of similar conversations. One recalled Maria using the phrase, "You said you would help." Another remembered the word, "contract." To the investigators, the consistency of these recollections suggested more than chance. Maria had indeed been in negotiations or disputes linked to her promised opportunity. The children's testimonies provided emotional weight because they captured the change in her tone, a shift from hopeful teacher to a woman caught in a serious disagreement. The most striking detail came from a boy who claimed to have seen Maria leaving with a man shortly before her disappearance. His description was specific in an unexpected way. He said the man smelled strongly of cigarettes and cologne. The sensory detail gave investigators pause. Children often notice impressions adults overlook, and in this case, the combination of smoke and fragrance stood out as memorable. The boy emphasized that Maria did not appear alarmed. She walked beside the man willingly. To detectives, this detail suggested familiarity or trust, even if misplaced. Staff at the orphanage offered further perspective on Maria's situation. Several confirmed she had been under financial strain in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. They described her borrowing small sums, skipping meals, and appearing more fatigued than usual. The staff recalled her confessing that she had recently pawned her grandmother's jewelry to cover expenses for costumes and class supplies. The act underscored the depth of her commitment, but also revealed vulnerability. By sacrificing personal heirlooms, she demonstrated both desperation and determination to keep her program alive. Investigators pieced together the pattern. Maria had been promised financial support from someone posing as a benefactor, yet her daily reality remained precarious. The emails referencing sponsorship did not align with her evident struggle to fund basic necessities. If she truly expected large sums, why would she continue pawning valuables? Detectives considered whether the promised funds never materialized, or whether she had realized too late that the support was fraudulent. Children at the orphanage noticed subtle changes in Maria's demeanor. Some recalled her looking distracted, checking her phone more frequently, or whispering to herself between classes. One child described her sitting quietly with the diary in her lap, staring at the page without writing. Though they could not interpret the signs, these small shifts suggested growing tension in her private life. The absence of her diary, already noted by investigators, now gained sharper focus. If she recorded her worries about money and promises within its pages, the missing journal could provide direct evidence of manipulation. The financial pressure surrounding Maria became the central theme of this phase of the investigation. Officers documented her pawn transactions, confirming the jewelry sale through local shop records. Receipts indicated she had exchanged heirlooms for modest sums, just enough to cover practical expenses. These findings contrasted sharply with the grand vision she had described to friends about staging a performance with her students. The contrast pointed investigators toward exploitation. Detectives concluded that Maria's financial vulnerability made her susceptible to manipulation. Her dream of supporting her students, paired with her mounting debt, created fertile ground for someone to take advantage of her. The mysterious phone arguments about money and promises reinforced this suspicion. Whoever was on the other end of those calls held leverage over her. The voices of the orphans added depth to the investigation beyond facts and figures. Their recollections revealed the human side of Maria's struggle. The woman who smiled through classes, who stitched their costumes, who reassured them even as she fought unseen battles. The contrast between her public patience and private stress painted a portrait of resilience, pushed to its breaking point. As interviews concluded, detectives compiled the children's accounts into the broader timeline. Maria had received promises of support, argued with someone over financial commitments, sold personal belongings to sustain her program, and was last seen with a man described not by his face, but by his smell. Each element pointed to exploitation rooted in her desperation. The orphanage staff emphasized that Maria never complained openly. She downplayed her hardships, shielding the children from her worries. Yet her actions, pawning jewelry, stretching food, and pushing herself to exhaustion spoke louder than words. Investigators recognized that someone aware of her situation could easily exploit her trust. The fraudulent offer of sponsorship, combined with her willingness to sacrifice everything for her students, created a dangerous intersection. The chapter of Voices from the Orphanage reinforced the conclusion that Maria's disappearance was not random. It was shaped by the pressures she carried and the vulnerabilities she exposed. Detectives noted that every testimony returned to the same themes: money, promises, and a man whose presence lingered in memory through scent. These threads narrowed the scope of the investigation, pointing not toward chance abduction, but toward targeted manipulation. The lingering question for investigators became whether Maria's financial strain was merely background context or the central lever of her disappearance. If she had been deceived into believing in sponsorship, had she confronted her manipulator on the final night? And if so, did that confrontation escalate beyond argument? The children's testimonies closed with one haunting consistency. They remembered her determination to protect them from worry. Even when frustrated, she reassured them with promises of brighter days ahead. Detectives left the orphanage with the weight of that contrast. Maria Alvarez had given her orphans hope, even as her own life slipped into danger shaped by desperation. The unresolved truth remained. Someone had seen her vulnerability, and someone had used it. Detectives traced the unexplained bank transfer linked to Maria Alvarez's disappearance. Records showed that a sizable payment had been deposited into her account just days before she vanished. At first glance, the money appeared to confirm her claims of receiving support for the grand performance she had promised the orphans. But when investigators dug deeper, the trail led to a shell company registered under a vague name connected loosely to the music industry. The company itself raised immediate suspicion. It had no physical office, no identifiable employees, and no legitimate business activity. Its registration was tied to a post office box in another state, and its financial activity suggested it was created solely for routing payments. Detectives concluded that it functioned as a front, but for what purpose remained uncertain. The connection to the music industry only added to the puzzle, since Maria had believed she was working with a world-famous artist. The transfer opened two lines of questioning. Was the music icon himself directly involved, using an obscure entity to hide his philanthropy? Or was the shell company established by someone impersonating him, exploiting his name to bait Maria into a trap? Both possibilities required careful evaluation. Investigators examined Maria's belongings again. Among the items recovered were promotional flyers for the artist's upcoming concert. The flyers bore handwritten notes in Maria's handwriting, highlighting dates and circling times. Alongside them, detectives found ticket stubs, confirming she had purchased seats for the event. Attached to the tickets was a slip of paper that appeared to promise backstage passes, granting her access to the artist in person.